Good morning from San Francisco, California. I'm coming at you today with some lectures. Lectures on chapters 4 through 6 of Seminar 21. Lessons 4 through 6. They're not really chapters in any regard, but I think we can tackle all three of them at once, draw out some of the main insights, and make a lot of good sense of what Lacan is up to. It took me 4 times through these chapters, reading them, studying them, and I thought by the 3rd time, these are awful. There ain't shit happening in here. 4th time through, however, my eyes started to pop a bit. To start, let's review a little bit of what we've got going so far. First and foremost, the theme here is 1 + 1 = 3. And I recall for you the passage in Seminar 21 where Lacan crystallizes this thought. It's on page 69 of the packet we're reading. The further I go, the more I am convinced that we only count up to 3, he says. What does he mean by this? Well, here's how it works. In order to have 1, you must first have 2. Think foreground and background. You can't have one without the other. They are dialectical terms. And one of the odd wagers in all of this is that my man Kenneth Burke was wrong. There are no such things as positive terms. The discovery of the symbolic for Lacan, especially as it pertains to language as a differential system, is that every one comes with a 0. That every 1 comes with a 2. In other words, that all terms are fundamentally dialectical, at least, and the wager is, once you dig deeper, they're trialectical and beyond. But let's just stick with our basic count here. In order to have 1, you must first have 2, because otherwise there's no background against which something can appear in the foreground, like the pen I once more hold up on the screen for you against the background of a wall. And where 2 or more have gathered, my biblical friends, there is always already 3. Why is there always already 3 when 2 have gathered? Because there's a minimum, irreducible, pure, irremediable difference between these two entities, the pen in the foreground and the wall in the background in this example. And let me be clear about this. This minimum, irreducible, pure, irremediable difference between the two is neither one nor the other. The minimum irreducible distance or difference between this pen and the wall is neither pen nor wall. It is a third element. So let me be really clear about this as we get going. Thirdness is necessary. It's requisite. It's prerequisite. But let me ask you this. Is it also presuppositional? I don't think so, but hang tight. Let's see if we can figure it out. And what about our vaunted, beloved oneness? What about oneness qua wholeness, completion, totality, consistency, singularity, autonomy? Remember, that's the stake. Oneness with the other is founded atop the search for oneness with one's self. And the word for that is autonomy. Let me ask you then, what is the word that we use to describe the pursuit of oneness, wholeness, completion, totality, consistency, and singularity, union with another? That is the sexual relationship. It's the pursuit of oneness with another. What can we say about oneness with selves and others alike? Simply, that shit don't exist, except in our imaginations, at the level of the word, at the level of the image, at the level of the figure. It doesn't exist. except in our imaginations. And everything turns on this, as we're going to see. The imaginary is actually the linchpin for Lacan's line of inquiry into the impossible. You see, there's no such thing as the one, even and especially when it appears otherwise. But it's when it appears otherwise, when we encounter something of the one, Yadlun, that we get this opportunity to realize, recognize, restore, and rescue the impossibility atop which this image sits. So, let's add some more captions to this. If thirdness is necessary, what can we say about oneness? It's impossible. It is fundamentally impossible. And we can learn about this impossibility. We can access this impossibility. Indeed, we have no choice but to encounter this possibility whenever we push on images to the contrary, images that suggest oneness is indeed possible. Let's be even bolder at the start of this next round of lectures in our series on Seminar 21. Oneness is imaginary. It is also impossible. Two-ness is symbolic. Think plus minus, presence, absence. Think differential relations. Don't forget what happens when you look up cat in the dictionary, as one of you recently messaged me about the other day. You just loved this image of, what was it? A fuzzy, four-legged feline fucker? Somebody really liked that one. Each of those terms makes sense only in the context and connection and differential connection to other terms that it is not. Cat does not equal fuzzy. Cat does not equal fucker, unless you're one of my cats. And I'm looking at you, Lucifer. Yeah, you do equal fucker. So I guess that proves Lacan wrong. Check it out. Oneness is imaginary. Two-ness is symbolic. What is thirdness? Why, of course, it's the real. Now, oneness qua imaginary points us to impossibility. Thirdness as the real, that shit is necessary. So notice how the modes get involved here as well, as we consider these three dimensions of speaking being as Lacan now is describing imaginary, symbolic, and real, or as he likes to put them, real, symbolic, imaginary. As you can tell in just this presentation, it's also a bit more complicated than you just heard me say. You see, the non-duped, these non-dupes who err, the non-duped which turn out to be the most duped, these are the ones among us who wish to mostly live in the imaginary, ever in service to illusions of oneness. Why are they dupes, these supposed non-dupes? They don't realize, these non-dupes, that they are dupes of the real from which their illusions of oneness stem, and toward which these illusions always sooner or later point. And this really is the hermeneutic phenomenological bent of what Lacan is doing here. In the non-dupes' figments of reality, they fail to see what Lacan in television calls the grimace of the real. This connection between the imaginary, here an imaginary consistency at the level of the one, and what it ultimately leads to, where it ultimately points us, namely in the direction of a multiplicity and inconsistency on the edge of a void known as the real. This is how Lacan is thinking right here. This is the key point. The non-dupe doesn't realize that, like Freud before him, they're dupes of the real from which their illusions of oneness stem, and toward which these illusions always, sooner or later, return. But damn if their lives aren't meaningful. So it goes in the imaginary. Or better, so it appears. But just because you e pluribus unum some shit in your life doesn't make it so. Behind, beneath, just beyond every image of wholeness, completion, consistency, singularity, autonomy, and above all oneness, there lurks a forgotten thirdness, a lost origin comprised of what can only be described as a multiplicity. The theory and technique of Lacanian psychoanalysis is uniquely suited because explicitly designed to recover and restore, indeed, as you heard me just say, to rescue this lost multiplicity. Behind, beneath, and just beyond every e pluribus unum, flip over a United States quarter, my friends. Behind each and every of those e pluribus unum, meaning out of many one, psychoanalysis finds an ex uno pluris, out of one, many. And by many, I mean a multiplicity the lowest count of which is 3. This is what I mean by thirdness. 3. What the non-dupe enciphers, analytic experience deciphers. That is what this reveals. That is what's at stake in this. The encipherings that lead to imaginary constructs of meaning and analytic experience when working with neurotics in particular, this is deciphered. These meanings are marched back to multiplicities. This is what deciphering does. It takes that shit apart. Every one is revealed to be many. Ex uno plures. But let me explain a little further what we're doing here. When I say thirdness and emphasize Lacan's claim that we're only ever counting to 3, it's quantity, not sequence, that I'm talking about. Lacan starts to get really clear on this in chapters 4 through 6 of Seminar 21, and we should be crystal clear on it as well. It's the multiple 3, not the ordinal sequence 1, 2, 3 that matters here. It's the fact that there are 3, not the ordinal sequence 1 followed by 2 followed by 3. Numerically speaking, thirdness is a cardinal matter, not an ordinal effect. Cardinality has to do with quantity. Ordinality in mathematics has to do with sequence. When we're talking about thirdness, we mean cardinality. It's about having the count be 3, not counting 1, 2, 3. There's always already 3. As another way to figure this. I think this is why, in chapter 6 of Seminar 21, Lacan eventually switches the term thirdness to triplicity. It's a weird one, but I like it if you think about this, especially in relation to duplicity. Triplicity, though, is a term that I think captures this cardinal matter that is 3. And I think he does this, switch to triplicity, to avoid anyone thinking that there's an ordination to his coordination of the human subject's 3 dimensions. these dimensions known as real, symbolic, and imaginary. Lacan doesn't want us to think that there's some ordination there, like one comes first, the other comes second, the other comes third. He wants a coordination of these three registers without an ordinal effect. It's an important move, and one that he's really driving upon. The reason why he wants to do this is that ultimately he's going to push this beyond alphabetic games, beyond numerical games, and into a topological wager, where it's about the spatialization of a multiplicity, not about the ordination of its elements. But we'll get to that. Be patient. We'll get there when we get there. What are these three dimensions again? These magic three that give us the cardinal matter of triplicity: the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary, right? Order them however you like. What matters for Lacan, again, is the fact that in order to consider any one or any two of them, their triplicity, their being three, as he crudely puts it, must already be in effect. In order to consider one of them, in order to consider two of them, you can't help, whether you want to or not, count three. Even so, I'll add this. It's the real, more than the symbolic, more than the imaginary, more even than their Borromean linkage, that primarily concerns our boy at this point. The real, he tells us in chapter 5, that is what is at stake this year. It is a matter of seeing what real there is precisely in this Borromean knot. And again, with more oomph, he says it in chapter 6. Meet me on page 109. I got a passage to share with you. In this knot that I put forward, in this knot made up of the symbolic and of the imaginary, insofar as it is simply something that makes three of them, which knots them. It is the real that is at stake. The real stems from the fact that they are three. Why is the real three? It is a question that I ground, that I justify from the fact that there is no sexual relationship. And it is a question that we are going to slowly answer over the next few lectures, if we're lucky. Slowly moving in that direction, let's just ask the question, the first of dozens of questions I have for you about this. Why, again, is there no sexual relationship? You just heard him say it in this passage. Why, again, is there no sexual relationship? Because wherever, whenever, however, them two sexes try to make one, to become one, to fuse into one, they fail. And why, again, do they fail? Because thanks to language use, which is simultaneously what constitutes them each and stands between them both, they can't help but count to three instead, again and again. What does this leave us with? Two of them, plus a differential something in between. Next question. What is this differential something in between? We've been naming it for years in this series of lectures on Lacan. Here in Seminar 21, our boy wants to be explicit about it. And this, I would say, is a key term and a key moment at this stage in Seminar 21. There, he calls this differential something in between them two sexes an irremediable division. It's a passage that we're going to return to. It's a division which is not just irremediable, he quickly adds, but also, and again I quote, without any mediation. It's from page 119 of our packet. We'll get there soon enough. Next question. What, then, is this division? Lacan is outspoken, again on page 119. It is the connectiveness between two knowledges insofar as they are irremediably distinct. Connectiveness? Between two knowledges, you can guess the type of knowledges here. This irremediable distinction, but wait a minute, serves as a form of connectiveness? Oh Lord, look out. This, if you ask me, is just enough to keep us dreaming about the opposite of irremediable division. Not two sexes linked by an irremediable division, which thereby brings their count to 3, but a singular, universalizing sexual rapport in which the two can be mediated and fused into one. Here is the fantasy. 1 + 1 = 1. And that little bit of connectiveness, even if it's at the level of an irremediable distinction between two knowledges that don't overlap, it's enough to keep us dreaming. The logic here, as Lacan sees it, is again dialectical, but with a twist. To even speak of something in between them two sexes, and all the more so when we do so in terms of impossibility, is to inadvertently, unavoidably plant a seed of hope for some kind of remedy. A hope for mediation to come. A mediation which is not yet actual, and thus made to exist, if we can say that, instead in a field of possibility. That's why I put this in the logic of the dream. I think Lacan is pretty good on this point. Again, I quote, "By irremediable division," he says, "I mean what cannot be remedied, which implies that mediating it would already be possible." All of which, I think, brings us to the central theme of chapters 4, 5, and 6 in Seminar 21. And hang on a second, because we about to round the corner. The central theme in all of this, that the logics I've been talking you through culminate in, is love. From the start of chapter 4 to the end of chapter 6, the theme in Seminar 21 is love. The real may be what's at stake in these chapters, but it's by way of love that Lacan inquires after it. At this point in his thought, here in January 1974 or thereabouts, he's got two basic notions of love in mind. And these two notions are going to be what the next lectures focus on, starting right now. The first notion of love that he's got in mind is one founded on illusions of oneness. The other that he's got in mind, even if only in the back of his mind at this point, is a notion of love premised on logics of triplicity instead, specifically a topologic of triplicity. Now, this shouldn't be news breaking because we've encountered both forms of love before, and we will indeed consider them both. But let's start with the first, this notion of love founded on oneness. In Seminar 20, Lacan reveals, and we have followed suit, in calling this approach to love narcissistic. Why is it narcissistic? Because it's ever in search of wholeness and completion via union with others. And in its quest for oneness, narcissistic love is imaginary. Only in the field of fantasy, at the level of the image, can love of this sort be said to exist. And only by non-dupes, of course. They're the ones who claim it exists. Because oneness is impossible, even and especially when it appears otherwise, narcissistic love is essentially phantasmatic, which is precisely what makes it so damn meaningful, to put it a bit archly. And of course, with a nod to the first few lectures in this series where meaning figures so largely. To love in search of oneness is to live in service to meaning, with all of its fantastic encipherings, love being just one of them. From courtly love to Christian love, then back to courtly love, it's at the level of the word, the signifier, the meaningful figure, the significant image that narcissistic love operates. And the signifier in question here is simply the word love. You see, love in this tradition, from courtly to Christian, back to courtly, and who knows, perhaps there's a new wave of Christian love coming at us. Love in this Western world is a word, it's a signifier, it's a meaningful figure, a significant image of the one, of the belief that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, and certainly doesn't bring us to 3, but instead yields 1. How exactly do the non-dupes of this glorious Western world sustain this narcissistic imaginary fantasy of love? They do so by emptying this word, this signifier, this figure, this image of its sexual content. On this point, Lacan again is clear. Non-duped narcissistic love, call it courtly, call it Christian, is, quote, sustained by emptying love of its sexual meaning. Let me show you the passage where this starts to pop up. In our packet, it's on page 98 and extends to the top of page 99. It's worth paying attention to here. It is in ceasing to write the sexual meaning of the thing that one makes it as is tangible, that one makes it possible, namely, insofar as it must indeed be said, as one ceases to write it. Once the thing, love, has happened, it is obvious that it is starting from there, that it imagines itself to be necessary. This, indeed, is the meaning of the love letter, which does not cease to be written, but only insofar as it preserves its meaning, namely, not for long. This is how there intervenes the function of the real. Love thus proves to be contingent in its origin, and at the same time, there is proved the contingency of the truth with regard to the real. Well, okay, that kind of started a little bit accessible, and you'll note it takes its start just from the riff I read for you about love being sustained by emptying love of its sexual meaning. And then he goes on this screed that I just read for you. What the hell is this about? Let's see if we can bring some additional clarity to this passage that becomes increasingly squirrely as it goes. In narcissistic love, oneness, union, holy matrimony, and till death do us part, they all seem possible because the irremediable division, that sexual non-rapport, that conditions this appearance of possibility has been subtracted, left out, placed under erasure. This is what it means to empty the signifier love of its sexual meaning. And now, let's see if we can work through Lacan's modal and medial logics here. Narcissistic love can be written, and its writing imagined as necessary, as, in other words, that which doesn't stop writing itself, because the aspect of human togetherness that cannot be written, whose writing is impossible, the aspect of human togetherness that cannot stop not writing itself, is no longer mentioned. It's left in abeyance. Indeed, it's forgotten by what is said. I love you. Pay careful attention here. As you just heard me say, Lacan's logic is not just modal, but also medial. His modes that he's thinking with here are the possible, the contingent, the necessary, and the impossible. Noticeably absent from this list, and in a way that I think dogs his thought and has been dogging his thought since Seminar 19B or worse, is the potential. Potentiality is noticeably absent from Lacan's thought. We'll come to that a little bit later. For now, though, he's only working with these four modes: the possible, the contingent, the necessary, and the impossible. And the medium, here's that medial part, that he's working through is writing. We've been through this stuff before, so let's just recall what you already know about this modal medial line of thought. If something is possible, it may come to pass. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it's possible. It just might be somehow, some way, someday. At present, the possible is not being written, not writing itself. In other words, not showing up, not passing into existence. It's just possible. It's not actual. But it might. Somehow, some way, someday, it might stop not being written and thus pass into actuality. What does it mean for something to be contingent? Lacan loves this term contingency. I'm not sure he's got a real grasp on it, but he certainly loves this term. If something is contingent, it does indeed come to pass, entering into existence, becoming actual, etc. But it didn't have to. And this is the hook when it comes to contingency. The contingent is what does exist, but what also didn't have to. A contingent event, you see, is an actual event that does but didn't have to occur. Kind of like you, once more, tuning in to this lecture. You are absolutely watching this thing, but you didn't have to. You could have walked the dog instead. You could have done some laundry instead. Hell, you could be reading Lacan instead. But that ain't what you're doing right now. Right now, you're tuned in here. That is a contingent event. You don't have to be here, but you are. And that's why when I say I love you, I mean it. Let me be clear about the contingent, since it's so key to Lacan. The contingent is what stops not being written. even though it didn't have to. Which brings us to the necessary. If something is necessary, it must be. It has to be. It must come to pass. It has to occur. If something is necessary, it cannot not be. In Lacanian terms, what we would say is that it does not and cannot stop being written. That is necessity for Lacan. It's what does not and cannot stop showing up. And now, for the granddaddy, the Walt Whitman of the group, the impossible. In the impossible, we see the opposite of the necessary. Just think about this. If something is impossible, it cannot be. It cannot come to pass. It cannot occur. It cannot enter existence. It cannot show up. It cannot walk up your driveway and knock on the door. The impossible is what cannot stop not being written. All right, that's a pretty fancy line of thought, my dear Lacanians. How does it all hang together in terms of theory and technique? Let's try and be precise here. What Lacanian psychoanalysis reveals to be impossible, making good dupes of those who walk its paths, narcissistic lovers misconstrue as possible, an imagined possibility which they then further misconstrue as contingent, a phantasmatic contingency which they even go so far as to misconstrue as necessary. So necessary as to be a requisite part of any loving relationship. To be in love, they'll tell you, is necessarily to feel one with your partner. No feelings of oneness, no love. On this, the non-dupes swear. And for Lacan, this is also where and why they err. Instead of accepting that oneness with self and other alike is impossible, these non-dupes insist that it is necessary. What cannot be is for them what cannot not be. There is, indeed, such a thing as the sexual relationship, they insist, again and again, in one Hallmark card right after the other. This is the love letter that Lacan mentions in the passage we read from Seminar 21. This love letter which does not cease to be written, but only insofar as it preserves its meaning, namely, not for long. It's a love letter that cannot stop being written for the very same reason. The eternal, endless, limitless love it purports to represent turns out to be fleeting. It's meaningful, but not for long. Its meaning simply doesn't hold, and thus it must, of necessity, be renewed, rewritten, reinscribed, reiterated again and again, encore, without a space between the N and the C. One Hallmark card after the other. This is why, when I say love letters of this sort amount to those Hallmark cards, I think you already know exactly what I mean. Because every damn event imaginable, and all the more so when love is on the line, comes with a flurry of Hallmark cards. Go to your nearest grocery store. Go to your nearest department store, one of these stores that purports to sell everything. Go to your superstore and find the aisle that's just full of cards, Hallmark style cards, pre-written with sentiments of X and sentiments of Y, courtly and Christian love alike for brother, sister, mother, father, partner, self even. Mail a Hallmark card to yourself, why don't you? Every damned event seems to have a series of smushy Hallmark cards ready for it. And guess what, motherfucker? Nobody has ever sent, signed, received, delivered, or purchased just one. Nobody, myself included, has ever signed, sent, received just one of these cards. And every one of them we've received has one thing in common. In these love letters whose meaning doesn't last, there is no mention of the impossible, of what cannot be, of what cannot be written, of what cannot stop not writing itself, namely the sexual relationship. A rapport without remainder, fissure, or furrow in which 1 + 1 = 1. Show me that shit. You can't, and I can't either. Because we're talking about a sexual rapport which is no such thing. This is what Lacan means when he says in the passage you heard me read, that love emerges as a meaningful signifier. Call it courtly, call it Christian, only insofar as its sexual meaning is left out. You see, Hallmark cards on, how about Valentine's Day? We're still in the month of February, mind you. They can only be written insofar as their authors stop writing the sexual, or at least stop trying to write the sexual. Every trace of the sexual must be placed under erasure in order for love of this sort to be written. And not just once, but again and again, encore, to the point of necessity, and again, one Hallmark card after the other. Just ask any non-duped lover, and they'll tell you true love never stops being written. Ask Bell Hooks, and she'll tell you it's a daily, hourly practice, this love. Maybe that's a little too radical for you, so let's hit up Mother Teresa on the point. Love, according to the dear mother, is a fruit in season at all times. But maybe that is even too radical for you. Let's hit up the Bible. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, we read in Lamentations. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. And this is the logic at work here. From the possible to the contingent to the necessary. This is the modal logic of narcissistic love, that first mode of love we're to discuss in these lectures, in its endless, fantastical quest to prove that 1 + 1 = 1.